One day, as part of my job, I had to visit a remote village in the northern part of the United States. My task was to install new electricity meters and interact with the consumers. I had grown accustomed to people sharing their mundane stories with me while I worked, but I usually tuned them out. However, this time I came across an unusual house. It was located at the edge of the village, and almost all the windows were boarded up with rotting planks. The door barely held onto its rusty hinges, and the garden was overgrown with weeds and thistles. The worst part was the stench that emanated from the house. It seemed like it had survived all the wars and disasters in history. After seeing this depressing sight, I didn't feel like meeting Michael Davis, the consumer who lived there. I didn't want to go inside, but I had to finish my job, so I approached the door and knocked while my driver waited in the car. From inside, I heard a voice yelling, "Who wants to die?" I replied that I wanted to live, and explained that I had come to install new electricity meters. The owner told me to go away, saying that he didn't care anymore and that he would soon die too. I insisted on doing my job and asked him to open the door so we could sign the installation agreement. Suddenly, the door swung open by itself, almost knocking me over. I felt scared. The stench became even more unbearable, and my eyes fell on pieces of rotting meat lying on the floor, surrounded by flies. The owner sat on a stool in the middle of the kitchen and asked me if I liked his house. I asked about the meat, but he yelled that it was none of my business. His appearance was terrifying: long, unwashed hair and beard, ragged clothes, untrimmed nails on both hands and feet. I felt disgusted and wanted to leave immediately. My wife, mother, father, and brother all died. My brother hung himself in the attic, my parents died in the kitchen, and my wife suffered for a long time before passing away in the bedroom. Now I am alone, and I will soon die too. They are calling me to join them. He said that even his father comes to him every night and calls him to join him. I felt very uneasy. Suddenly I heard rustling and commotion coming from a distant room. I asked who was there. "There's no one there. Get out of here," he yelled. The doorway into the room was covered with a dirty rag. There were some rustling sounds and what sounded like incomprehensible human speech coming from there. "Who's in the room?" I asked. "There's no one there. Get out," the owner shouted. Suddenly a hand appeared from under the dirty rag. It was black with long claws and looked very much like a human hand. Then there was such a terrible scream. My heart sank. I flew out of that cursed house like a bullet. When I turned around to look at the house, I saw him standing at the window muttering something. The door to the house slammed shut with a loud bang. I ran to my car, wanting only to get away as quickly as possible. At work, I told my boss about everything that happened, and he contacted the police. As I later found out, the local police officer visited the house, but it was completely empty. Moreover, the police officer said that no one had lived in the house for decades. I still don't understand what happened on the day of my visit to that house. Once I worked as a security guard on a rotation schedule of 15 days on and 15 days off. I was assigned to a business center that was generally quiet, especially on weekends when no one was around. One morning, after sitting at my post for about 3 hours until 10 a.m., I thought to myself, I'm going to take a nap until lunch and then go grab something to eat. I pulled out my cot, laid down, and fell asleep. In my dream, I arrived home in the village where my older brother and mother were doing some repairs. My mother saw me and said, "Why did you come back so early?" "Well, they're already waiting for you. Go say hello in the room." So I went into the room, and there on the bed sat my deceased grandmother, while my deceased father was sitting in a chair. I ran up to them to hug them and started asking how they were doing, why they rarely came to visit, etc. My father responded but kept his eyes hidden from me. I asked him, "Dad, why won't you even look at me?" At that moment, my father looked up at me, and instead of eyes, he had black voids. I immediately ran out of the room, but my father caught up with me and started choking me. I felt like I was suffocating, trying to pry his hands off my neck. Finally, I crawled into the hall and grabbed onto the cross around my brother's neck. That's when I woke up to the sound of my phone ringing. I let out a deep sigh and saw that my brother was calling. I answered the phone and said, "Thanks to you. If it weren't for you, Dad would have strangled me." My relative is a middle-aged, serious, and thoughtful man. He is a long-haul truck driver with a lot of driving experience. He had never encountered anything mystical on his way, except for one incident, after which he stopped making fun of his colleagues' stories and sat quietly. Here is his story in his own words. Once I went on a long trip in the summer. I was transporting agricultural machinery to a local farmer in a village. I arrived at the farm closer to midnight. They greeted me, fed me, and said they would unload the truck in the morning. They offered me to spend the night in a temporary house. I don't know why I agreed. I could have slept in the truck. The house had only one room with the necessary furniture. The door doesn't lock, just open and close it. The switch is near the door. I went in, looked around, took off my shoes, turned off the light, and without undressing, fell asleep on the bed. I fell asleep immediately. I woke up suddenly, as if from a good kick. Although it was night, the room wasn't so dark because the light from a street lamp was coming through the window. I looked. Someone was sitting on the chair opposite the bed. I wasn't scared. I got up from the bed, approached the door, turned on the light. I saw a man sitting on the chair. What's strange is that he was dressed out of season. His gaze was heavy and angry. I asked him what he wanted, man. And he was silent, just turning his head after me and looking at me like an enemy. I asked, "Why are you silent? Are you deaf or something? If I took your place, don't be offended, I didn't know. I'll go to the truck to sleep now." And he was silent and looked at me in such a way that I felt uneasy. I was confused, and instead of leaving, I approached the bed and lay down with my back to the man. I lay there looking at the wall, and his gaze burned my back. I thought, what kind of fool am I? What if this crazy man has a knife or something else? He'll hit me and won't even ask my name. Screw him, I'll go to the truck. I got up abruptly and the chair was empty. My jaw dropped. Well, I thought, okay, how did he come in? I didn't hear anything while I was sleeping. But how did he leave? No rustling, no footsteps, no creaking door. How did he disappear into thin air? I couldn't fall asleep until morning. I lay there thinking. Maybe it was all just a dream. So it turns out that in my sleep I got up, turned on the light, and went back to sleep. But it seems like nothing like this has ever happened to me before. In the morning, while they were unloading the truck, I walked around the farm looking for that man. People noticed and asked me what I lost. I described the man to them. They just shrugged their shoulders. And so I left in bewilderment. It's been 2 years since that incident. But every time I remember it, I feel that gaze on my back and it makes me